Purpose is such a big topic. And I don't know if any of you feel that way as you looked at the topic of purpose, because oftentimes I think when we hear the word purpose, we can also kind of cover that word with shame. Shame that we don't know what our purpose is, shame that we couldn't speak to our purpose eloquently, or maybe even shame that we're in a season where we're like, my purpose is solely survival. And I wanted to kind of approach this training in just a little bit of a different way, and hopefully too more of a humble way, in that I am not an expert when it comes to helping people uncover their purpose quickly, because I don't necessarily think it is a fast journey. And I don't think it's something that you arrive at and then for the rest of your life, you're like, all right, I'm good. I've got it. As we dive into this training today, I'm going to give you a framework, but I'm also going to kind of walk you through maybe where you're at today and how we can start to move towards knowing and understanding and relishing in what our purpose is. First, I wanted to share a quick story. So the last few months were really, really precious. As you know, I welcomed my second daughter into the world, Quinn, and took maternity leave. And we are based in Duluth, Minnesota, which is tundra. I mean, it is so cold. And so we were really fortunate to get to the sunshine for a few months. And as we were in the sunshine in Arizona, we were with my grandparents and my parents. And it was such precious time. And my grandpa Sulo is 93 years old. And if you follow me on Instagram, you have probably seen my grandpa Sulo. And what was incredible is that every time I'm with them, they try to understand what I do. And it's really hard for them to comprehend. And it's hard for a lot of people to comprehend. But my grandpa started to understand a little bit more about Instagram. And in our time together, in that month together, he became somewhat of an Instagram celebrity. My grandpa is hilarious. He is 100% Finnish. He is one of 13 children, and he loves jokes. You could literally say pretty much any word and he would have a joke for it. You could be like bird and he would come out with like 10 jokes. And as we were on this trip together for an entire month, I would challenge him. I'd say, Grandpa, do you want to share a joke today? And he lit up. I mean, if you watch him, he was practicing. Every day, my mom would say, I was looking out on the patio and your grandpa is literally sitting out there, like practicing cues and hand motions and facial things. And one night I had to have a discussion with him and explain that Instagram stories are 15 seconds long. So we've got to tighten up the delivery a little bit, Grandpa, because some of them were a little long-winded. And he would just take this challenge and he would rise up to it. And it was so beautiful and precious as a granddaughter to see my grandpa get so excited about something. But also what was incredible and totally unplanned about this is that his entire purpose while we were in Arizona was to share his jokes with Instagram. And this man, I mean, he would literally, I would be with him and I would post a joke and he would sit there and stare at me. And I'm like, why is he staring at me? And he'd be like, how are the results? What are the results? What are people saying? Did they like that one? And I was like, oh my gosh, Grandpa. And at some points we were like, we got to take a step back from this because he was so excited about it. We've been home for a few weeks now. And the other night he called me and he said, I just wanted to call and check in on the results. How are they going? What does your audience need from me today? And I recognized this beautiful, beautiful thing that purpose can be for somebody, right? It is this electric energy, this vibrance that is so undeniable when someone feels this purpose. And seeing that through my grandpa at 93 years old, who lives in a town of 400 people, to even imagine him. I was like, Grandpa, imagine you're on a stage in front of 1 million people. Like, what would you do? Man, it was such a beautiful reminder of purpose. And I just wanted to share that with you, because if you can watch somebody light up and if you can be a part of that transformation in even the smallest way, it can totally change their life, but also change yours. And so when I was thinking about this topic, I was really thinking about how a lot of us are walking through life wondering and questioning, what is my purpose? I think that what's really fascinating is one study shares that over a quarter of Americans that are adults do not feel like they have a clear sense of purpose. And I would honestly argue that that number is likely higher after coming out of what we are coming out of as a world. I think a lot of times, we are not allowing ourselves to get quiet enough to really explore what that answer might be, or to ask ourselves the questions that will guide us on that journey. And I just want to say right now that you are in the right place. If you are sitting here and you're like, I cannot confidently answer this question with certainty. I think that purpose is something that is so easy to get lost in the minutia of life. You might have noticed my background looks a little bit different today. I mean, it's looked different a lot throughout Growth Day, but today especially, I am actually in an office for the first time in a decade. I have been an entrepreneur for a decade and I've never had an office. I've built my business off of my couch and my kitchen table and my bed. And it's been beautiful, but what I realized in this season of life with a small baby and a toddler is that if I really want to show up with my purpose, I've got to start to create boundaries, and I've got to start to create a way for me to get quiet enough with myself to ground myself in that purpose before I show up anywhere. I have recognized that my purpose is evolving, and the way that I show up has to evolve to match that in order to show up in this season of life. And so one thing that I was thinking about a lot when it comes to purpose is that your purpose can change on a day-to-day basis when it comes to short-term purpose. I like to look at purpose as short-term and long-term. For me, a lot of times my purpose short-term is to keep my children alive and to have them feel loved and understood. And for me to show up in ways that might just feel small sometimes, whether it's laundry or cooking chicken nuggets or opening the Amazon boxes that I forgot what I even ordered. And a lot of times when we are in that day-to-day minutia, we start to lose that tie, that connection to that bigger reason of why we're doing all of that. Have you guys ever felt that way where you're like, I am literally on the hamster wheel and I am just surviving or checking things off of my to-do list or keeping people alive or being a caretaker, and I cannot tie any of these small things to the big thing? And what I think is paralyzing about this thought about purpose is that it feels really big, right? I was doing a lot of research on this before this call today. And so much of what people were talking about when they were talking about purpose were these mission statements. And I'm going to guide you through how to create one. However, when I was leaning on that, I was like, man, like my mission statement can change in a matter of minutes, right? You have a kid running in the room. Okay, the mission is now different. You have a presentation or a job interview, or you're showing up. The mission is different. And purpose can feel so big and paralyzing that sometimes we block out this desire or this intention to even connect with it because we're worried that it is too big for us in the season that we find ourselves in. So if you are in a place right now where purpose is so caught up in the small things, where purpose really feels like a necessity for survival, then I want to invite you to start exploring what purpose can look like with the bigger scale. I often think of purpose, and I kind of have to visualize this, so it might help if you close your eyes, but I almost feel like purpose is like being tethered to this knot. We were talking about rock climbing the other day, and I was like thinking of like purpose being like carabinered and locked in on something that is bigger than you, that is going to hold you in when you feel like your hands are losing its grip. Purpose is that thing that gets you out of bed in the morning. However, it is possible, and a lot of us are surviving and probably not thriving without knowing what our purpose is, or without being tethered to something that is helping us to show up in the ways that only we can. Now, I think that not knowing our purpose is what keeps us on autopilot, right? It keeps us in that minutia. It can keep us stuck. And the reason why is if we don't have a purpose, we have nothing bigger. We aren't there exploring what is more, what is next, where do I go from here? And so it's actually not surprising to me that a lot of people don't know what their purpose is, because finding your purpose likely means that you have to stop the hamster wheel and get quiet with yourself. I am so excited to kick off today, and hopefully today's topic just spurs something exciting in you. Seeing the topic of wellness at first I kind of freaked out because over the last few months, I've literally felt like I was in survival mode. If any of you have been fortunate enough to be through a first trimester, you are exhausted and tired and nauseous and all of the things. And so when I looked at this topic, I wanted to stay in total alignment with who I am and where my gifts are. And I wanted to kind of pivot it slightly. And so today what we're going to be talking about is boundaries, because boundaries are something that I am obsessed with. And the more research that I do surrounding setting boundaries when it comes to relationships and work and personal boundaries, the more that I see that it really plays a role in our health, in our relationships, in our work, in our well-being. So I wanted to kick this off with a very quick story because maybe you are finding yourself in a similar situation. So the other day I was hanging out with my daughter, Coco, and I got a text message from one of my friends, and she's an amazing, amazing person. She's the CEO of a company. She messaged me and she said, "Hey, I'm launching this book. Well, could you do this interview with me? It would mean so much to me. I want you to be a part of this book launch." And I'm juggling a toddler on my hip. And I'm like, yes, I will. And I didn't give myself time to actually think, like, do I have the bandwidth for this? Is this going to work with my schedule? Is this going to not just serve her, but also serve me and where I'm at? And over the next few days, she texted a few times to follow up with me. And I kind of felt this like sinking feeling. Have you ever committed to something and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I don't know if this is the right thing. I don't know if this is the right alignment. Like, I don't know. And so she's texting me and I can feel this hesitation in me. Like I wanted to pretend like I didn't read the text because I didn't know how to respond and I didn't know how to politely back out. And I've uncovered so much over the years that so many of us are innately people pleasers, right? Like there's nothing better than serving others, making them feel valued, bringing them joy. And we're taught that from a young age. And so after a few days, she finally texted me. She said, "You know what? I'm going to let you off the hook on this. You are so busy. You're growing a human. I can sense that you've got a lot on your plate. And I just want to give you the grace to step away from this." And I immediately felt this sense of relief, like, oh, thank you. Thank you. And then I wrote her back and I just said, "Thank you so much. I truly wanted to support you, but you're right. This is just too much for me right now." And if she wouldn't have stepped in, I probably would have continued on that path of dread and feeling like I wasn't going to fully show up. And it made me realize, okay, let's think about these boundaries and how we are setting them in place, not just in our lives, but in our work and the way that we show up. I had a team call the other day. My team is all women, and we were on the call, and I said, "How many of you guys felt a little anxious last week?" And almost every hand went up. And I was like, okay, what's going on with the moon right now? Are we in a different lunar phase? Like, what's happening? Is there something going on? And I think that there is a lot of anxiety building for so many of us as the world starts to open up, something that we're all very excited about. But for so many of us, myself included, I've kind of thrived in more of an isolated environment. I'm introverted. I've learned to like feel safe in my surroundings. I've relinquished a lot of the guilt that I used to hold on to for not being super social. There's a lot of pressures in anxiety happening. And I'm just curious if anyone else is feeling that too, as we start to navigate what is this new normal. And I know we've talked about this a lot with GrowthDay as we're transitioning, like what is it that we're rushing back to? What are we excited about? But how do we also protect our peace as we start to kind of explore what this new world is like and take the lessons, because there has been so many valuable lessons this last year, and carry them forward with us. And I truly believe that boundaries are the way that we're going to be able to do this and do so elegantly. So how many of you love Brené Brown? I am obsessed with her. I think she's absolutely brilliant. And one of my favorite quotes of hers is, "Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. We can't base our own worthiness on others' approval." And this is coming from someone who spent years trying to please everyone. "Only when we believe deep down that we are enough and that we can say enough." And I love that line from Brené because I think it's super powerful when we think about boundaries, because we tend to think about boundaries in the form of disappointing others or that they're going to actually disconnect us.
But the truth is that a lack of boundaries is what actually disconnects us from ourselves. How many of you have ever felt just out of alignment? Like your life's compass is pointing in one direction and you're going in the exact opposite. And usually when we feel that way, we can pinpoint it to places where we have been trying to please other people. We've been adding too much to our plate, or we just haven't gotten quiet enough with ourselves to ask ourselves, what direction do I want to go in? So I was talking to my team about this because I think it's really important, one, as a leader, to understand what boundaries can look like, but two, as someone who creates a culture, which is all of you. You create a culture in your workplace, with your peers, with your mentors, with your family, to understand how setting boundaries can look and also how they can be respected. So the first thing that I think about when it comes to setting boundaries is how can we protect our best yeses and start to make no our default. So when I say this, I'm coming from a place of most of us are yes people. We want to say yes to every request, every opportunity, every chance to serve, every thing that we're needed. And we love to feel helpful. We love to make an impact. We love to show up for others. But what happens is that yes becomes our default. And so we start to overextend ourselves. How many of you have looked at your calendar and just felt dread? Like it's too full. There's too many things. I can't believe I said yes to this meeting and then baseball practice. And then I got to go here and I got to go there. When we start to protect our best yeses, like really covet them, it starts to help us make no the default. And here's what I want to share with you. I was sitting at a table the other day talking to another mother. And I told her, I said, I've gotten really good at saying no. And she's like, wait, tell me how. How do you say no? And I said, well, you know what? I created this template and it helps for me to communicate super clearly why I'm saying no without making the other person feel uncomfortable or that they're not worthy. And so she goes, can you send me that template? And I said, yes. So here's what the template says. Thank you so much for reaching out and sharing your idea or your vision or your request with me. I've recognized that at this time of my life, any yes that I say is an equal no to the values that I've set for myself when it comes to time, family, and energy. I want you to know I'm cheering you on and championing you every step of the way. And my no is not in regards to you, how much I care about you or your brilliant idea. It's more of me making an attempt to walk out my values in this season. And she goes, oh, wait, what? That's what you send people? And I said, yeah, that's what I send almost everyone. And she said, wow, that makes me respect you so much more. It doesn't make me feel less than. It doesn't make me feel like my idea stinks or I'm not worthy enough of your time or your energy. It actually makes me see that people can walk the walk. And so I created templates like this that allow me to communicate that boundary in a way that shares why I'm saying no, but also cheers that person on and encourages them to also set those boundaries. So one thing that I have been thinking about so much is that we all have this overarching narrative that we run through our mind constantly. And a lot of times we're really passive when it comes to it. Like we don't even realize that this narrative is running and it's telling us who we are, what we're capable of, what our purpose is. And within this big narrative, this big story that we tell ourselves about our lives, there are an infinite number of sub-narratives, these tiny little stories, these tiny lines, these tiny lies that can either empower us or they can cause us to self-sabotage. I feel like when we really get honest with ourselves and we think about the thoughts that go through our brains like a radio dial, a lot of us have this inner mean girl or this inner critic that can sometimes be incredibly loud, that can constantly be telling us that we're not enough or that we're not capable or that we're not skilled enough or valuable enough or pretty enough or skinny enough or whatever that is. But what I'm inviting you to do today
is like a dial on the radio to turn that inner critic down so that we can start to observe what our true mindset is, where it is rooted, and then how we can transform that as we start to move forward. So I want to tell you one quick story before we dive in. So my daughter is 2 years old. Her name is Coco, and she is just this little ball of energy. She's amazing. And every single morning when I wake her up, we always have like a little chit chat. And my daughter is slightly obsessive when it comes to cleanliness. She takes after my husband. He loves to vacuum. And one morning I saw her lick her finger and try to wipe a little mole off of her arm. She has this tiny little freckle, and oh my God, I just love that freckle so much. And so I'm waking her up out of bed and I watch her lick her finger, and she's just trying to get this mole gone. And it broke my heart because I was like, something in her thinks that that makes her broken or messy, or that there's something wrong with that. And so that day I told her, I said, honey, look at this. This is your special spot. Only you have this spot. It makes you one of a kind. It's my favorite part about you. It's so amazing. And the next morning I went in to wake her up in her crib, and she wakes up and she grabs her arm and she kisses it. She kisses that spot. And every single day when I wake her up now, she greets her special spot with so much love and adoration. And she notices little tiny freckles on me and on my husband, and she kisses them because we changed the way that she thought. We changed that thought pattern. And it was super interesting because I interviewed this incredible expert in neuroplasticity. And that word is so long, it almost threw me off. And she said that story about your daughter proves that our brains are malleable, like that we can learn and relearn thoughts and patterns, that we can actually change based on our environment and our perspective. And while it's so easy for us to imagine a toddler changing the way she thinks about this special spot, imagine what it could look like for us as adults if we understood and accepted that our brain is malleable, that it can change according to our environment or our perspective. And the good news is that as adults, we have more control over our environment, don't we? So environmentally, we're receiving input or feedback from 5 to 10 people daily, which leads us to cultivating similar mindsets and belief patterns. And what we need to know about belief patterns is that both positive and negative ones can become our perspective. So I hope that illustration kind of helps set us off as we start to kind of dig in to reframing the narrative. I got so many takeaways from all of the other speakers, and I learned so much, but I want to dig a little bit deeper into the stories that we tell ourselves. Because I think that a lot of times for me personally, and this is why I think I admire you so deeply, is that I avoided mindset work for so long. I avoided it until there was no more avoiding it possible. Because for me, I knew that I could adopt all the systems and strategies and principles and become this entrepreneur. But you hit a point in life where if you don't start unpacking the stories you're telling yourself, if you don't start getting really honest about the lies you're telling yourself or where your beliefs are really grounded in, you are going to max out and hit a limit that may be real or maybe just make believe. And I avoided mindset work for so long because I recognized that it would require for me to really trace back my beliefs and maybe unpack some of the harder times in life or the tragedies we've faced. And I know that all of us as a collective human race have all been through something challenging or hard. And so I just want to commend you. I think you are like 10 steps ahead of where I was until I was forced to really say, wait, the strategies and blueprints can get me so far, but until I fix my mind and my thoughts, I'm actually not going to move forward. So has anyone ever joined the app Headspace? It's a meditation app. I am terrible at meditating. I'm so inspired by the leaders who are like, I meditate for an hour a day. I'm so inspired by that. It's not for me. So the app Headspace is kind of like meditating for dummies, and I need it. It's like meditating for busy minds. And one of the first things that they guide you through that has really helped me when it comes to mindset
is they have you close your eyes and they tell you, what I want for you to do is to not shut off your brain, but to imagine your thoughts driving by on a road as cars. So each thought you has a separate vehicle, and they're just going to be driving down the road. And your job is not to judge them or redirect them. Your job is just to observe your thoughts. How many of you have thought like meditation is like not thinking? It's like shutting your brain off, right? And you're like, I can't do that. My brain is like constantly going. But meditation is actually observing. You become this active observer of your thoughts. And what was really important to me about learning that tiny little takeaway was that I can become a non-judgmental observer of my thoughts. And then I can start to connect the dots to figure out, are these thoughts rooted in feelings? Are they rooted in emotions? Or are they rooted in truth? And I think that when we start to unpack those things, we can start to trace through the narratives, those things that we have on loop that can really hold us back or that can propel us forward. And so what I want to invite you to start becoming is just an observer of your own thoughts, of your own inner critic, of your own inner cheerleader, and of this voice. Because when we can observe without judgment, we can start to kind of break things down in a way that allows us to rebuild in a way that doesn't invoke shame or guilt. One thing I want us to think about, the main areas where we have inner dialogues are about our work life, our financial life, our relationships, our health, and our abilities. And so when you think of those categories, I would challenge you to think about or write down the top area that you're struggling with the most. And so let's say you really struggle in work and you might be doubting your abilities to be able to effectively communicate. So you question yourself all the time. You question, did I say the right thing? Did I not say enough? Should I have raised my hand? Should I have spoken up? And that makes you really wonder, like, am I ever going to be a good leader? Can anyone relate to this? I feel like sometimes communication can be that thing where we're like, someone once told me I'm a terrible communicator and thus I must be. So whatever that story is that you're telling yourself in that area of life where you're like, I want to improve or grow here, or I want to change that narrative, I want for you to think about, how can you get all of the thoughts out? This does not need to be a journal entry that you'll come back with fondness. This could be something you could burn, but write down all of those dialogues that you tell yourself that you believe to be true. So what is that story that you tell yourself about why you believe you are lacking, or you're not effective, or you're not successful in this area of life? And if we invite ourselves to gently observe our thoughts and we continually ask ourselves a question, why, you'll likely start to uncover a narrative that has been on repeat in your life.
Reinvention, man, what a big word. And when I found out that this was the topic for this month, I was just thinking, gosh, how many of us are in this life stage, in this phase, this season of life where we're wondering, what does it look like to reinvent? And more importantly, am I in need for one? And as I was preparing for today, I always just love to look up, what is the definition? And reinvent literally means to change the way that you behave and the things that you do so that people think of you as a different person. And I love Merriam-Webster, but I also wanted to push back on that thought and to really challenge ourselves about, what do we think about ourselves? It's not necessarily what do people think about us, but how can we think about ourselves in a different way? And I found this amazing article about reinvention by someone named Karen Merrick. And it says, here's the thing about reinvention. And I want for you to listen to this before we dive on in. Some believe that it is tossing out the old or your previous roles and experiences or even work identity and exchanging it for something completely new. But that simply is not true. And this is why this is good news. The best power of a reinvention lies in leveraging every single thing you have ever done. We're talking the good, the bad, the ugly, the successes, the failures. Reinvention literally taps into the very real and often underappreciated or unarticulated skills, insights, and expertise that you have gained along the way. So it's not necessarily about creating a whole new you. It's about leaning on everything that you've ever been through, everything that life has taught you, and moving forward. And I recently shared this idea as a recent mother. Again, there's this whole theology around bouncing back for moms. I hate the terminology, because once you become a mother or once you birth a child, there's really no going backwards, right? We want to focus on moving forwards. And so this topic is so on point with where I'm feeling in my life, where we don't necessarily have to discount or discredit or disassociate from everything that we've learned or been through. This is our opportunity and our invitation to use all of those things for good as we figure out who we want to become. So real quick, I was recently at this dinner. It was a little mastermind dinner. If you don't know what a mastermind is, it's basically just a meeting of minds where everyone comes together collectively to help each other out. And I have not been in many rooms like that in the past 2 years, as you can imagine. And so it really felt like just this beautiful experience to be seated around people who are passionate, excited about what they were doing. And I noticed this trend within the room that as we went around the room, everyone was introducing themselves, and there was a lot of couples there, a lot of spouse pairs. And the men would generally start talking, and they would share about all these things that they've done and who they are and what they do and how they serve the world. And then at the very end, the women would kind of meekly add in like, oh, I just have this little side coaching thing, or I just am like kind of like an influencer. And it was almost this like apologetic acknowledgement of their identity. And we had a little break while we were waiting for dinner to show up. And I was sitting at one of the tables, and suddenly I kind of noticed all these women were around me. And one of them said, did you recognize that you were the only female who one spoke first, but who didn't shy away from sharing who you are and what you do? And I hadn't noticed that. But this topic today is so powerful because what I found is that so many of us are yearning for that purpose. And we're finding ourselves in this place of like, am I happy right now? Am I content? Am I loving my life, or am I faking to love it? And so I just think it's this beautiful reminder that like wherever you find yourself today, there is always this invitation for you to change the way you show up, but also to re-identify. So one of the things that I've been thinking about so much is a lot of times when we think about our identities, or when we think about like how we want to reinvent ourselves, we almost become apologetic about it. But if we are really going through life as students, which I believe we all are, this invitation to change and grow and evolve should be something that we welcome with open arms. There are so many different versions of ourselves that we are always becoming. And it's our job as a human being to acknowledge our growth and to honor that evolution. It's almost like we can wake up and say, I honor who you're becoming, and I really like this version of you. I literally say that to myself some days. So one of the things that I think is really fascinating is this idea of identity foreclosure. So I had a guest on my podcast and we talked about this. And essentially what identity foreclosure is that a lot of times we stay in things too long that we know are not maybe the right fit or are no longer serving us because we feel like we've already invested time. Have you ever felt that way where maybe you started a degree and all of a sudden you realize, wait, this isn't what I wanted, but I'm already 2 years in and it would be a shame to throw that away? Or maybe you're in a relationship and you have this feeling that this relationship isn't the best fit for you, but that you need to move on, and you're not necessarily honoring that intuition because you're worried that, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to start all over again, or I wasted so much time. Well, identity foreclosure is the exact reason why we hang on to things too long, whether it's jeans from high school that no longer fit us, or degrees that are no longer serving us, or passions that maybe just have not grown with you as you've grown. And so identity foreclosure is something that we really need to evaluate in ourselves. And a lot of times identity foreclosure, in my opinion, is coupled with ego. So let me break this down. I think that our society is really focused and fixated on titles, accolades, and awards. It's things that honor our success, but it's only honored in a way that other people can understand. And so when we look at this concept of identity foreclosure and we couple it with ego, I think that those two things are kind of this natural disaster, the reason why we stay in things too long when we're genuinely yearning for a change. Now, I want to share something with you. So I have been an entrepreneur for 10 years. And in the last 10 years, I have done a lot of different things. So I was a wedding photographer. I was a Midwest wedding blogger. I was a watercolor artist. I had my own little print shop. I started this podcast. I became a public speaker. I created online courses. I did online coaching. I've hosted masterminds. I've done all of these things. And most recently, I added the title author to all of the different things I've done. Now, I have really struggled in times where there are these transitions happening and I cannot communicate exactly what I do or how I show up and how I serve the world. But someone recently asked me, they were like, how were you able to pivot so many different times and find success in so many different places in a 10-year time span? I mean, that's a lot of things that I've done. And the reality is that my identity is not found in my output. My identity is found in who I am. And when we as human beings connect on this human level, it invites us to change and evolve in a way that people will support you as you grow. There's this meme that I just love whenever I see it. And it's like, notice who is watching you and says like, I like this version of you too. Those are the people that you want in your life. And so when we think about this evolution, and if we're in this season of like, I really want to reinvent myself, we need to let go of the ego of titles and things that will express our success. And we need to get back to, what do our values tell us success will not just look like in our lives, but that success will feel like in our lives. Today's training that I want to lead you through is going to be a little bit different. And I think it's because of where we find ourselves potentially in the world, but also where we might be finding ourselves in different life stages. As you know, for me, we just welcomed another baby. So I'm kind of in this cocooning stage with my family where I just kind of want to figure out our new flow. But maybe you are in a different season of life. Maybe you're going towards retirement. Maybe you're starting a new career. Maybe you're navigating family challenges. Maybe you're caring for parents or elderly. Maybe you're caring for children. I think that we all find ourselves in a unique situation. So first things first, whenever I approach a new year, there is just something so amazing to me about a fresh start. It feels like if you were on Willy Wonka and you got life's golden ticket, like Brendan talks about life's golden ticket, and you're kind of given this clean slate. And I walked into this new year as a postpartum mom, and we also got COVID. And so right away, initially going into this year, I was like, I could feel derailed within day 7 of 2022 if I allowed it. But when I was thinking about this training and thinking about how I would approach winning the new year, I really had to think about digestible chunks. I need to break things down into smaller sections for me. So if for you, when it comes to looking at this year at a glance, you're feeling overwhelmed by how we're going to tackle the next 365 days, or if at this point, 343 days, whatever we're at, if that feels overwhelming, I want to invite you into a practice that I've started doing. So for me, because of my life with my children, it's really hard for me to be able to even know what next month is going to look like, yet alone what next year will look like. And so when I started thinking about this year, the first thing that I wanted to decide on was a central theme. So how many of you guys have heard people choosing a word for their year? Now, this is a practice that a lot of people do. A lot of people show it. They share their word of the year. Maybe it's for accountability. Maybe it's just to put it out there. And for the last few years, I've chosen different words for the year. Now, it sounds like kind of a weird woo-woo type practice, but what I have found is that it almost lays a foundation for your year so that when you are setting goals or making decisions or navigating different scenarios, you can always come back to that home base. So for example, a few years ago, my word was surrender. We were in our fertility process and just trying to figure out what is this going to look like? And I needed to choose the word surrender. I needed to just surrender to what was going to be. The year after that, we successfully and thankfully had our baby girl, Coco. My word was presence.
I just wanted to be where my feet were. I'm still trying to land on my word for this year, but I think it's something along the lines of intuition. I need to follow my gut, to trust my gut. So when you think about the year, I really think it is helpful to choose a theme. This is going to be your foundation. This is going to be that place where you go, is this aligned with surrendering? Is this aligned with presence? Is this respecting my goal for trusting my intuition or my gut? And the thing that I also want to note is if you had a word of the year for last year and you felt like maybe you got derailed or it wasn't a success or you didn't quite win it, carry that word forward. That word can still serve you and serve as that base. There's no need to change it if that word is still working. So what I want for you to think about is how can we create a foundation, lay a foundation that has a feeling. So when I look at a lot of people and their goal setting practices, it's beautiful. They have these tactical things that they want to achieve within the next year. But a lot of times they don't actually think about how is this going to feel? How is this goal going to feel when I accomplish it? How is the pursuit of this goal going to feel? And what I found is that having that theme or that word, it gives me that feeling to really check myself and my alignment. Now, I want to share something that I am working on this year. I haven't shared it publicly anywhere, but it's something that I have recognized in myself as I've kind of evaluated last year moving into this year, is that I am actually aiming for more gray areas in my life. And let me explain this. I am an all or nothing kind of gal. I am either all in, gung-ho, full force, show me what I need to do and I'll do it, or I'm a nothing. And I've recognized over the last year that as I set goals, I tend to be very extreme. I don't know if anyone else resonates with this, but I am all in. I will not eat any sugar for 30 days and blah, 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 blah. And then the second I fall off, I'm a nothing. And so what I am trying for as an achiever, as someone who is striving to grow, to learn, to move, to navigate, is that I am aiming for more gray areas this year. And maybe that gives you a little bit of peace. Maybe that gives you anxiety, depending on where you fall on this spectrum. For me, I want to find more fluidity in my year. I want to find more room for grace, like Glo was talking about, but also just recognize that when it comes to things that maybe served me in the past, like certain boundaries or relationships, that I can find that area of gray that allows me to continue to strive to do better, but also doesn't derail me the second I fall off. I recently was on a phone call with a dietitian because one of my goals for this year is to feel vibrant. It's not to lose 10 pounds or to get back to my pre-baby weight or anything like that. It's to feel vibrant. And I was on the phone with a dietitian and I said something about Cheetos and I was like, oh, I love Cheetos. Like me and Coco, we can smash a bag of Cheetos. And I was saying how it wasn't a good food. And she goes, I don't want for you to look at things as good or bad. I want for you to think of things as optimal or less optimal. You have a less optimal snack. That's okay. Move on to an optimal one. Make a choice instead of looking at things as bad or good. And it really helped for me to think about how do I want to ground myself in gray this year in that I can continue to progress, but I'm not going to beat myself up or freeze the second that I stop or mess up. And so I want for you to just think about what that looks like for you. And that brings me to my next point. One of the things that I think we often fail at when it looks at goal setting or attacking a new year or setting resolutions is that we don't do it from a place of self-awareness. Now, I know a lot of things about you simply by you being here today, by joining this platform. You know that you want to grow. You know that you're willing to invest in personal development. You know that you need mentors. You know that you want to pour into yourself to move forward. But what I have found is that when we lack self-awareness, when we lack truly knowing ourselves, we create goals that don't serve us or our lives, but we also approach them in a way that makes it nearly impossible for us to follow through. So when I was thinking about setting goals for this year, I did it from this place of self-awareness. So my awareness was grounded in the fact that a lot of us are merely exhausted. We are 2+ years into a world that constantly is changing and shifting. We don't necessarily feel grounded in knowing what is next from a worldly standpoint. And so we struggle to choose what's next from a self standpoint. And my self-awareness was telling me that because I feel that level of uncertainty, I struggle in visualizing a year out from now. And so when I set my goals this year, I wanted to do it from a place that honored who I am and where I'm at in this season. For example, BRENDON is remarkable at teaching morning routines. So good. I hear morning routines and I'm like, yes, that sounds amazing. I would love to sit down with a journal and a hot cup of tea and take in the view. But I am aware enough of the season of life that I'm in that right now I need more sleep than that morning slowdown. It's just not necessarily feasible where I'm at with 2 little kids. And so I might not be a morning routine person, but I am really good at boundaries. So when I set my goals, how can I set them in a way that honors the things that I'm good at, which are boundaries and microscopic movements forward, in honoring that like progress is progress, even if it's small.
One of the things that I was talking to my team about when I started thinking about relationships is, as we are transitioning kind of into this new world and into this kind of new way of living, I don't know about you, and I'd be curious if you comment or raise your hand, or I know you're watching in many different places, but are you feeling any anxiety about kind of getting back out into the world and kind of exploring relationships back on a face-to-face basis? Because over the past year, a lot of our relationships have gone digital. And I was doing a little bit of research because there was this common thread on my team, which is a team of women. And we were saying that a lot of times we feel like we're lacking a level of closeness in relationships. Like we don't have a lot of close friends. But actually, when we did research, people generally have 3 to 5 close and personal relationships. That's it. And I think that a lot of times in our lives, we kind of tell ourselves these lies of like, I don't have a lot of friends, or people don't love me, or I don't have a lot of close people in my life. But when I saw that 3 to 5 number, I was like, wait, this is what reality is. Relationships take time and energy and work. And based on what stage of life you're in, that can look totally different. And so thinking about, on average, people having 3 to 5 close and personal relationships, I think that gives us permission to go really deep with our relationships and have them be super quality without worrying about quantity. So I was also curious about how the pandemic affected relationships, what people were reporting. And so what was super interesting is about half, so 46% of people that responded to the survey reported that the pandemic didn't really change their relationship. So about half of the people. Now, of the other half, 27% stated that it improved their relationship, and 27% reported that the pandemic made their relationship worse. So it's super interesting to me because half of the people remained status quo when it comes to relationships, whether that's friendships or love relationships. And then of the other half, it was 50-50 in terms of if it helped their relationship or if it hurt their relationship. And so I just think we're coming at a really interesting place when we're talking about relationships, because everyone's in a different situation. And that's why I love this month on Growth Day, because there are so many different ways to look at relationships: your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your family, your friends, your relationship with money. But knowing also too, kind of taking an assessment of where you're at after this last year and just being really honest, because we're going to get into something I'm really excited about, which is relationship archetypes. And if you kind of come at it from a place of knowing where you're at in a relationship, it'll help. So one of the last things that they found over the last year, so Wolfgang Krieger, he's a Berlin-based psychologist, notes that during the pandemic, people were reducing social interactions and focusing on fewer, closer relationships. So if we get back to that idea of 3 to 5 relationships, close and personal, I think one of the beautiful things of this past year is that it almost challenged us to kind of let go of some of those relationships on the fringe, maybe that aren't serving or that are draining us, and really focus on deepening the relationships that are really personal and important to us. And so I think it's kind of a cool signifier that we were almost granted that permission through the last year. So speaking of last year, my team and I, we hired an emotional intelligence expert, and it was honestly so fascinating. Her name is Tico Nejan, and she changed my life and she changed my team's life. And in our analysis of emotional intelligence, we had to do these personal assessments. If you've ever done like the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs, it's very similar to that, where you're kind of rating yourself. And one of the things that Tico called me out on throughout our relationship was that she said, Jenna, I see that you repeat a lot of the same behaviors in your relationships. She said, I sense these like patterns that you have. A lot of times I love to be the person that's the giver. And I'm not saying that as like a toot my own horn, like I love to give, but I love to show up in a relationship where I know I can add value, where I know I can help somebody. And when she called me out on that, she was like, my challenge for you is to like ask for help and not promise anything in return. I'm so bad at that. Like, I hate inconveniencing other people. I hate asking for anything. And she was like, you need to start flexing that muscle, getting better at that. And so Tico started challenging me to like work on relationships that I wasn't always the one giving or always the one making sure that someone was taken care of. And it honestly was a huge challenge for me. But what's so interesting is if you've never looked at relationship patterns, these patterns can be both good and bad. It's very similar to knowing your personality type, because when you can start to figure out what type of person you are or how you most commonly show up in relationships, it allows you to just bring this level of awareness to, is this healthy behavior or unhealthy behavior? And our relationships patterns dictate 3 basic things. So when we nail down what our patterns are, here's the things that they usually dictate. They dictate who we choose. So who are we choosing to be in relationship with? Again, this can be a love relationship, a friendship, whatever that looks like. So the kind of people that we're choosing, the behaviors we exhibit in relationships or how we show up or act, and what we will allow in terms of how someone else treats us. Okay. So who we pick, the behaviors we exhibit, and what we allow in how we are treated. And so this group, the Science of People, they nailed down 5 main archetypes of relationships. So listen closely. I'm going to walk through the 5 main types. So the first type of person that generally shows up in a relationship is the caregiver. So the caregiver is when you're always trying to take care of or fix someone. You might seek out a relationship with someone who you believe needs to be fixed, even if they don't agree or they don't acknowledge that. So the first type is the caregiver. The second type is the alpha. So you want to be the dominant force, the one who makes the decisions, the person in charge. You kind of create the rules of the relationship. The third type is the parent. And I kind of giggled at this one because you take on a more maternal or paternal role. And it said, like, if you're constantly nagging your spouse to empty the dishwasher or pay the bills on time or put their shoes away. And I was like, oh gosh, is that me? But it's where you're parenting the other person. And so the third one is the parent. The fourth one is the codependent. So you lose your individuality to become this unit. You become kind of one with the other person, and you each kind of give up your individual identities to kind of create a new one together. That's the codependent. And then the last one is the push-pull. So this is the more volatile approach to relationships. It's the type of relationship where you commonly make up and break up. There's a lot of drama. Highs are high, the lows are low. So again, the 5 are caregiver, alpha, parent, codependent, and the push-pull. And I think it's super interesting because you can take on traits of different ones with different relationships, but what they found is that generally we show up as one main type, and that our relationships, who we choose, how we act, and the behaviors that we accept are generally based off of that archetype. And I thought that was so interesting. If you know which one you are, comment so that I can see. I'm just super curious. So when Tico, our emotional intelligence expert, called me out, I recognized I'm generally the caregiver, the person who loves to help and fix and come in and make things better. But I realized that like I need to kind of back off of that a little bit and also ask for care to be delivered back without strings attached. That's what a relationship is, right? It's not one-sided. And so awareness around the role is just something that can really heighten how you show up. And it can also kind of give you pause when you're in certain scenarios where you're prone to be the alpha or to parent or to create that push and pull, that drama, so that you can kind of take a step back and really enrich your relationships. Confidence is this journey. It's this constant learning and changing and ebbing and flowing, and there's so much about it. And so I don't believe that there is a one size fits all statement about confidence that is going to be true for all of us. The thing that I think that can be true for all of us is that confidence shows up for each of us when we can finally say, I am me. I know exactly who I am. And frankly, I like it. And that thought alone is so freeing because it's not marked by anyone else's interpretation of confidence. It's not marked by anyone else's belief of what we should be or how we should act or how we should perform or what we should do. I was researching about confidence, and there is this amazing woman named Evelyn Marinoff, and she researches and writes about the psychology behind confidence. And I think it's super interesting. So get this, men's self-esteem tends to move in this upward linear projection. So just kind of picture this. Men are moving upward and it's very linear, while women have more variable trajectories and experience frequent ups and downs in their self-worth levels. How many of you can relate to this, whether you're a man or a woman? I thought this was so interesting. And so that makes men more stable in their own self-opinions, while for women, it's truly this blend of nature and nurture that shapes our sense of worth. And the good thing is, like, I honestly see this fact as a win because we all want to make more improvement. We want to mold our own self-opinions. And the thing that is exciting about confidence is that we can improve it. Right? It's this soft skill that often gets downplayed when you think about when you are applying for a job or when you're telling people what you're good at. We always lean on the hard skills that we have, whether, it's education or we're proficient in something. And confidence is this soft skill that often flies under the radar, but I believe that confidence can change every facet of our life. And it's good because we can improve it. There are studies that have shown that. And so there's so many different factors that can really influence our confidence level, and our unique environments and our histories, specifically our upbringing, where we grew up, our parental care, our quality of education, have this large impact on shaping our levels of confidence. So one other study found that later in life, nature's effect was 40%. And 60% was about nurture. And I think about this a lot as a mother because I think about how I'm bringing up my daughter and how I want to instill confidence in her, and how what I do as a mother, how I instill that confidence is going to attribute for about 40% of what she believes to be true about herself and for herself. But it also gives a lot of hope because that leaves room for 60% of our confidence levels to be nurtured. I believe that confidence shows up in 3 different ways in our lives. Confidence shows up in who we are. So my grandmother, I talked to her yesterday on the phone, and she is struggling with memory loss, but she still has these very vivid memories from my childhood. And every time I talk to my grandma, she always tells this same story. And I was 5 years old. I was laying in bed with her, and she looked at me, and I had my hands like this on my face. And my grandma said, "Jenna, what makes you so beautiful?" And I looked at her, I didn't even pause. And I said, "Well, that's just how God made me." And my grandma tells me this story every single time I talk to her. And I hear this story over and over again. And it reminds me of that childlike confidence that I had at this young age, because I knew who I was. And I also knew who created me. And no matter what you believe, I think that there's something so powerful in feeling connected that we were made in some sort of vision. So first, I believe that confidence shows up in who we are. It's that innate, ingrained confidence that we just carry naturally. And those are likely the things that we have had confidence in since we were a child. So the first one is confidence in who we are, but the second one is confidence in what we know. So when I became a mother 2 years ago, I remember leaving the hospital and thinking to myself, I can't believe they're just letting me walk out the doors with this child. Has anyone felt like that? Like, you're like, where is the college degree that tells me I'm equipped to care for another human being? And it's funny because now 2 years into the game, I find myself feeling like an expert in the experience I've lived and being able to contribute to other people who are experiencing things that I once experienced and had questions on. And so number two is confidence in what we know. And confidence is formed in so many different ways in our life. We are constantly students of life, and there is no other community I'd rather be a part of, because you guys see how important it is to be a student, to continue growing through life. And I'm right there with you. And so sometimes the lessons are the things that we learn in formal classrooms with the fluorescent lights. But sometimes, and most of the time, the lessons are the things that life has taught us. When we soak in what we consume, we start to grow a level of confidence in what we know. And I want for you to really think about this one, because a lot of times we lean on more of the formal education, but I want to think about the things that life has taught you, the lessons that life has shown you, the things that you found yourself researching in forums at 3 a.m. because you need answers, because you likely know a lot more than you give yourself credit for. And in that knowing, you get to show up with more confidence. Now, number 3 is confidence in how we can impact. This leans on a statement that I like to say, which is who I am and what I do. Have you ever noticed that a lot of times when people take the stage, or they're hosting a community, or you land on a website even, a lot of times people will say, this is who I am, this is how I serve, or who I serve, and this is how I serve them. And I think that there's so much confidence in almost having that own mission statement for your life. And so when I look at the people who are out there who are really set on making the biggest impact, it's those who can confidently tell you, this is who I am, this is what I do, and this is how I serve the world. The deeper that we understand and feel confidence in our gifts, the greater our impact is. And I love that. So just to reiterate, the 3 things that I think can influence our confidence, and that ways that confidence shows up in our lives, are confidence in who we are, confidence in what we know, and confidence in how we can impact.
This can be your day for personal growth. This can be that day you committed to and you remember and you go, that was the day I got myself a community. I got better coaches. I committed to making my life the absolute best that I could. This is that day. Make today your growth day. Click the button on this page and sign up right now.